Here is one of the first matches of the first round of the chess.com Horde tournament that I am running. It's being sponsored by chess.com in the sense that they are awarding premium prizes to the top 3 placers. Here I have Yohe versus stephenthomasconrad. So Yohe is in Ethiopia, yes, and Stephen British? American. He's an American, and they're both experienced players. But here's the first game. How it works is each match, the players keep playing games until somebody wins 5 games. And I thought I would take a look at what happened. Yohe begins with e5, so he has a positional threat of playing d5 because that would make the center in white's control. So stephenthomasconrad actually allows it. However, it's not as simple as that white is winning, because after d5 and a move like a takes b5, a takes b5, and e6, white cannot actually play d6 without a concession, because after d6, black has one resource to liquidate white's center. See, if black just plays any casual move, then white will be winning, but black has one way to prevent white from having a winning position. The resource is c takes d6, and the point is actually to sacrifice the bishop, so that after the trades, black has queen b6, exploiting the fact that white cannot defend this pawn without losing material, so losing this b5 pawn. So basically, white's position, I guess, is not terrible, but the queen side can be undermined, and black got rid of his bishop, so actually he's not that cramped. Only this knight is kind of stuck, but the queen side can bustle. So if white defends the b5 pawn, okay, then black just liquidates the center, and this should be really good for black. In the game, Yohe plays e4. That's also a good move. Both d5 or e4 are very reasonable, because after e4, black has nothing better than to transpose into a good version of a standard white opening. Like after d6, we kind of transpose into e5 mainline, but where black put a pawn on a6, and that's kind of a waste of time. Anyway, so e4 and b6. Now I think Stephen is in trouble. I think white has a great advantage now, and multiple ways to realize that advantage, because after a trade on b6, white can just simply control the center. And now, whichever way black moves in the center, white will close it. So if d6 then e6, and if e6, then just d6, followed by c5 or something. So b6 is not right, because white will control the center by his own hand. But Yohe goes ahead and plays h5. White is still better, why not? But I like c takes b6 just based on preference. Bishop b7, h4, c6. Okay, so he wants to play to control the light squares in the center, like d5 mainly, but it's not realistic. And then he pushes d6. Yeah, he kind of has to push d6, because once he pushes e6, he will no longer be able to push d6. So he figures that he may as well trade d6 pawn so that he can play e6, right? Well, in this position, white has multiple ways of getting a perfect position. I personally like the idea of trading on c6 and then trading on b6. And in fact, that's what Yohe did in the game. I 100% agree with this decision. It's really nice order by Yohe, because after c5, we will liquidate the center, right? We will take away all of black's pawns in the center by trading twice, and then I think black is just having severe problems because black has no way to control the squares that white wants to attack. Like, for example, c4, d5, e6, c5, d6, etc. And that's because black has no pawns in the center. In the game, Yohe actually... Steven took on c5, and then after d takes c5, play queen c7. Yeah, it's very good for white. White has absolutely no drawbacks to his position that I can think of. Maybe black has like a threat of a5, because after b5, maybe the c5 pawn is loose. But I don't know. In this position, I would still play something like e6, because I don't know. After a5, can I just play b5 anyway? I think this trade is okay for white, right? Yeah, I think white is winning. If black tries to undermine the e6 pawn, that's okay. We can just trade for now. But I guess there is a point to be made that black will now be able to play e6 and liberate his position. Still, I think white is better, because after e6, white can just trade off the pawn, and black loses even more control of the center, so white can then freely advance with an unstoppable attack. So I would play e6 here, just playing against black's possibility of playing e6 himself. Yohe went d4, which is natural because it kind of counteracts a5, right? And heads to d5. However, black can maybe try to salvage some... He can make some progress, improve his position compared to a couple moves ago by playing e6, because that controls d5, it allows the knight and bishop to create some problem, and it's just very natural playing in the center, just to control. Knight d7 was played, and now I would say e6 absolutely punishes black here. It's even stronger than it was a move ago, because the knight has to move, and then we can play d5 with absolute perfection. Our plan is, after we develop our pawns, we will probably strike, I don't know, maybe we will trade and then play something like b5, for example. And it's not so worrisome if black can break open the queen side, because white has such an advanced center that for black to attack the queen side would result in too much loss of time. So I think black is dead here. He has to play something like rook a5. We can play a4, the rook has to move back, or otherwise a queen somewhere. And then just c6, easy win, because we will play c5 and play b6 or d6. Or we could even play f6 sometimes to play d6. So that would have been the most classical method of converting this position into a win for white. So in the game, Yohe just went c4 and postponed e6. He never played e6. However, black played g6, which allows white to trade on g6, which he did, and now follow up with e6. And I absolutely agree with this decision. I think it's better than trying to win the free material with g6. I think positional quality is the top priority, especially for white. So I love this decision. I think Yohe has a really good metagame strategy side of things. Like, he's really good at understanding what's the best plan or stuff like that. He understands metagame strategy very well. So a trade on g5, okay, doesn't change much about the position, right? And Yohe did take with the f pawn, not the h pawn. But either way is perfectly fine. So all white has to do is just develop the pawns and then find a break. He went ahead and played d6. This position is so good for white that there are so many pawn breaks here that favor white. There's like c6, there's d6, there's even f6, there's even b4. Even b4 just wins for white. Something like this, right? Or otherwise d6. So the reason for that is that white's center is dominant, but also black has no breakthrough. And so the positional quality of white is better in every way compared to black. So d6 was good, and then white takes on e7, I guess, so that he can play d6, d5, and c6. And that's basically what happened in the game. Aha, he went f6, okay. Again, everything wins, like there's so many good ideas. Knight g6, h5, knight f8, and white can just play f5 if he wants, or he can also play e7, which is good enough. And again, the reason why white's position is so good that he has multiple ways to win is because black gave up control of the center in the opening. So the rooks traded off, which is natural because it kind of liquidates white's attack a little bit. But nonetheless, white just has a forced win here, I would guess. I mean, I would play b4 here if I were white, because due to the absence of the rooks, I can advance the b-pawns without losing material. In the game, Yohe started to play really sloppy. He even allowed the knight to take on c5, like here, yeah. And if only he had played b4, then converting this position would have been easier. But I did not really see any moment at all where Yohe was losing. I do like his plan of expanding on the king side because, well, the queen is standing on d8 and there were two pieces guarding on b8 and a8, which means that if we go back, so black has 3 guardians, actually 4 guardians on the queen's side, because he has this pawn, he has this bishop, he has this knight, he has this queen, and then only 3 guardians, okay, maybe even only 2 guardians on the king's side, the knight and bishop, and maybe the king, depending on depending on what he can do. But yeah, only the knight and bishop defend the king side, so attacking the king side's the superior place to play on the board. The knight sacrifices on g6 so that he can mobilize the king, but this just makes white's job easier, I think. Just, okay, now f6, super sloppy, right? Why not f4? Why not even... Yeah, why not f4? That looks like the normal move here, right? But still winning for white, I think. Okay, I don't know about here now, because maybe black can play queen g5 here, and the point is if... no, I don't know. Yeah, if d6, then simply take on h5, and then there's no e7 because of queen takes g6, and if d7, then we can just probably play queen g5 again, so, or even take it. So maybe after queen g5, black could have actually salvaged the position. White can still try to win, maybe, I don't know. He could play... g4? That doesn't really work, I guess, because after queen takes g4 and e7, he can just take on e4, unfortunately. How about f4? The idea is to play f5 so that he cannot cross over and take g6. But, of course, he can take h6 and then... he cannot, actually. But he can probably get over, like, queen g5, and then white has to play d6, and then maybe black holds something together with queen d8, although it still looks really dangerous because white can play e5 and f6. So yeah, I think it's hard to evaluate this position after queen g5, but white's best try is definitely f4 to defend the g6 pawn, which is not only important for securing the advancement of the d and e pawns, but also to defend this h7 pawn, right? So yeah, that's definitely the best plan, I think. Otherwise, maybe black can go... I don't know, just... he cannot really go back, otherwise white just improves his position. Anyway, black went bishop b7, so I think Stephen Thomas Conrad is just kind of running out of plans. He targets e6 pawn, but it's very easy to defend. And then knight a6, okay, so just losing more material. White may as well take, and then this is easily winning for white. But d6 also looks good for white. And then I'm not really sure why he went d7. I think white has an easy game after c5. Maybe he was worried about queen e5, but I can just play e7, and then when he takes on e4, I can play f6. And if he guards, well, there's f7 in that case. If he guards here, then yeah, maybe that's the best defense for black, right? But maybe I can still play this way. Take, take, take. And it looks like white is in trouble. So maybe I'm wrong about c5. Maybe d7 is sensible, but after he... Yeah, okay, I see. So this is good for white because the queen cannot really take on e4 because of f6. So yeah, actually, it was really smart for Yohe to play d7. I actually like this move a lot now, because I see now that it forces black to sacrifice another piece, and so that means that black will have less defensive resources on the king side and on the queen side. So yeah, d7 is a great move, maybe one of the highlights of Yohe's Horde career. I mean, it looks so unnatural, to be honest, but I think it's brilliant. So here, white is just simply winning because both pieces, the king and queen, are just simply overloaded, and black resigns. To recap, black got a dead loss position because he misplayed the opening, and he misplayed the opening because he did not solve his problems in the center. Alright, next game. So I will always side with Yohe's colors since he is the winner. So it begins with e5, so again threatening d5. Yohe prevents the threat with d6 because after d5, black can play d6 and liquidate the center, and this position is basically winning for black. But after f6, white's position is okay. Also, e4 is a good move here. Both moves, f6 and e4, are quite good, because after e4, there are a lot of systems black can play, but white is doing really well in all cases that I know of. f6, it's a good idea because when black trades 3 times on f6, black will not be able to open up the king side. So he plays h5, which is logical because he's kind of signaling that he wants to open the h file before he liquidates the f6 point. e4 is played, but I would like to draw attention to this variation with f takes g7, bishop takes g7, and the really interesting idea g6. It looks crazy, right? But the point is to close the h file. So after f takes g6, white can play g5, and this position is really hard for black to win if white plays well. I'm not sure if I guess white should be losing, right? Because he gave up a pawn, and maybe black can stall and create a fortress. But I guess it's an idea to play for some games. But Stephen's e4 is also sensible, kind of preparing to play d5 and consolidate the center. So Yohe takes first on f6 and then takes on h4, and I would like to draw attention to his move order. At first glance, you might think that there's no difference between trading on g4 and trading on f6 in the next sequence versus trading on f6 first and then trading on g4. However, there is a difference because if black starts by trading on g4, then white has this strong reply, f takes g7, and the point is that after the trades, white will be able to play h5, which is extremely solid. It makes it impossible for black to really undermine the king side. So that's why it's better for black to first take on f6, so that after the recapture, black can trade on g4, open the h file, and now trade on f6, exploiting the fact that after the trade between g7 and f6 here, white cannot take anything on g7, right? So, good decision by Yohe. And g5, okay, queen goes back. And now Yohe kind of switches plans, so I'm not sure why he plays bishop e7, because that's not consistent with his plan. Maybe he only found the plan afterwards, like after making this move that he realized was aimless. I think here Steven can just play a5, and it's not so simple for either side, right? But instead of bishop e7, I would just play a5 straight away, and the point is to play d6 and knight d7 to try to break open the queen side. So in this position, Yohe goes bishop e7, and then for whatever reason, Steven chooses e3 here. And I'm not sure why not e4, but maybe it just looks better because it creates the chain on the dark squares. d6, okay. Here again, I think white can play a5, and it's work for black to try to win it. But he goes e2, allows a5, and then black infiltrates the queen side with this standard pattern of trading on b4, then trading off the bishop on c5, so that he can sacrifice on a4, bring the queen behind, and break through. So now black is winning. Okay, white gives up a pawn for free, and so black has 3 defenders, not counting the pawns. He has a king, bishop, rook, and then he has some pawns on the queen side to slow down white's play on the queen side. Meanwhile, white's position got split up, and it's over. So I guess that black was winning ever since the knight was allowed to sacrifice on a4. This is the point where black is winning, so maybe white should find somewhere to improve. So in this position, maybe white should play something else like e4, although I suppose that no, then black can play knight b6 and create problems, so that would still win for black. So that means in this position, b takes c5 was a mistake, because it clears the b6 square for the knight, since without a b4 pawn, white cannot play a5. I suppose he can still play a5, but then black just takes it for free and nothing changes, because the knight is always there to sacrifice on a4. So instead of b takes c5, white should have played d takes c5. And now after bishop takes c5 and d4, okay, actually I would not play d4 here, and I'll show why in a second. So e4, and now if black tries to play knight b6, then white can play a5 thanks to the fact that the b4 pawn defends a5. So that's the improvement for white. Instead of b takes c5, play d takes c5. Now, why not to play d4? Well, because after knight b6 and a5, black actually has a cool move, a cool sequence, which is knight takes c4, and the point is after b takes c4, black can just play bishop b6, and so if white takes it, then black just puts the rook on a4, brings the queen to a8, and breaks in. Because without this b3 pawn, white cannot mobilize the a pawns. So white cannot take the bishop, So instead, he has to play something like a4, right? But then after the bishop takes and the rook takes and b3, well, I guess so something like bishop d7, right? And then b2, queen a8, a3. Well, black can take on a4, threaten the c4 pawn, forcing white to defend it, and then I think black probably has a breakthrough somewhere because he can probably play, let's see, I think he can try b6. The point is to go c6 on the next move, but maybe white can respond d5, so I don't know. How about c6? And if b6, then c5. Take, queen drops back somewhere, like queen a5, d4. If he plays d4, then the queen can break in by taking on c4, then playing bishop a4. Also, when it takes on c4, he can enter to queen a2 already, so he doesn't even need bishop a4. So, if white does not bother to defend these pawns and just attacks, okay, let's say e4, right? Well, black is in no particular hurry, I guess. He can just take these two pawns and then simply play bishop a4 to sacrifice on c2 so that when the queen comes to a4, white cannot block his entry. So that's why it's risky to play d4 in this particular case. So instead, it's better to keep the pawn on d3 so that after knight b6 and a5, white can recapture the knight with the d pawn instead of the b pawn. By the way, that's a pretty good illustration of how it's superior to capture away from the center rather than towards the center. That's like true 70% of the time because when you take towards the center, you kind of weaken the squares on the sides. You lose control of the position because you kind of create these square weaknesses, and the sides are more vulnerable than the center anyway. Yeah, because if white were to take on takes c4, then maybe white is losing because of bishop b6, because he has a square weakness on b3, and therefore cannot play a4, and therefore black can break through by force. So also, white should have played a5 every time that black forgot to play it himself, because black should have played a5 right here. And maybe here white can already play a5, and then it's I don't know this position, but maybe black just plays d6 and c6, tries to get a bishop on c5 so that the queen can get to a5. I don't know. But not a big problem with the opening. e4 is okay, and what both sides did was okay until white took the bishop and allowed the knight to come to a4. Alright. Or rather, until white took with the b pawn instead of the d pawn, right? Next game. Okay, this one, Yohe's white and opens with d5. In the first game, Yohe chose e5, and we get a similar situation. So this time Yohe trades on b6, like I suggested. But then he does not play e5, and I'm not sure why. Here I would just play e5 because now when black tries to open up the center, we can again close it with great position. So he plays h5, and it's still great for white. Okay, here white can play e6 already. One feature for black is that he has great control of the c5 square. But the thing is, maybe someday white can liquidate the dark square control, and maybe by playing f6 and e5 and trading sometimes, but so that he can play c5. Or otherwise he can play a5 to prepare c5. But I don't even think it's that important to play c5. So this game I'm not saying too much because I think black just got a bad opening outcome again and just needs to change his opening. I think it's hard to find any improvements for black. But again, Yohe plays this d6 break, kind of like deja vu, like we saw in the last game, and takes back with the center pawn. That's good. Bishop takes, okay, takes back with a center pawn. Good decision again. I mean, okay, the queen was attacking g5, but even if it weren't, I would still take away from the center. Queen a5 does nothing, right? Take, e6, okay? Again, white has many ways to win. Can just play d5 or anything. Take the knight or even push d7, that's also good. Anything. Okay, well, I don't know why queen f7, but I guess Steven was about to give up anyway. But, what to say? I mean, first of all, Yohe won because of a great opening outcome, right? Like, this opening, super good for white. And then Yohe plays the pawn to e6, which just absolutely suffocates black. And therefore, black could not do anything, and white is just going to slowly kill him. So, simple game. Just need to understand that whoever controls the center is going to be winning, going to have a winning position. Alright, this is the last game. Okay. Yohe's black, and it begins with e5. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not the last game. Okay. I keep thinking that since Yohe won 4-0 that, like, no, maybe it is the last game. They rematched, but then Steven forfeited. That makes sense. So Steven just decided, you know what, I'm not gonna play this last game. Okay, so e5, a5, and Yohe shuffles the rook, okay? So this gives white great control of the center, but with a concession, which is that white has to give up material. I would not take this g6 pawn. I would rather play h6 because it immobilizes the movement of the g-pawns a little bit. He can play g5, but then it comes as a sacrifice. So I think it's better to play h6 rather than the take, because taking allows the g-pawns to advance without losing material. I also would not have taken on f6, I mean f7 to g6, because that gives up control of the e6 pawns, e6 square. And now white has a lot of space, so I think white is winning this position, maybe. but I would have not played h3 or anything like that. Okay. Here I would have taken back with the d-pawn because it's generally better to capture away from the center because it maximizes the freedom of your position. But f takes e6, f5, f4, f3, e5, e4, e3. Okay? And d6. Pretty interesting decision. I'm not really opposed to it, but why not play first c6 so that white can grab more of the center, right? Grab more squares. And now white can choose d6, or in this case even choose b6 because the rook landed on a7, allowing this b6 break so that after c5 the queen cannot go to a7, very important. So then after the queen moves back, there's just b5, and I think black has problems, right? That means in this case it's better to start shuffling the other rook, and now here b6 is not as effective because of queen a7, and black is doing well, I think. But he can play d6, he can even play f6 and f5, right? Something like this might be one of the strongest plans in this position. But anyway, in the game, Steven went for swift d6. Again, it makes some sense because it clears out black's center pawns, therefore allowing white to advance further in the center. I think that Yohe should have went after the h4 pawn, because after Steven takes back, black can just grab g2 pawn, f3 pawn, f4 pawn. It looks like black's queen will cross over to the center and control the whole board. So I think this is just simple win for black, right? I mean, maybe scary at first, but when the queen gets to a square like f4 or e4, it becomes impossible for white to advance the center any further, because he cannot play c4 without allowing the queen to capture on d4, and he cannot play d5 here. We just take it. So I think bishop takes h4 was a better decision than going after the just waiting and taking on d6, because here white could even just play c5 and then play d6 eventually, right? Like here. And that pretty much forces black to either move back or to capture on h4, or to ignore it. Maybe even ignoring it is the best in this case. I don't know. But yeah, definitely black needed to take on h4, I think, as soon as possible. But here, I think, okay, this is interesting, right? So white's center is pretty thin, which means that he may lose control of the position. Here, black could have tried to take on a4, but then that allows d5, so I don't think that's any good for black. Maybe black can take the knight, but nah, it doesn't work, because even after targeting the b5 pawn, the pawn will capture on a4 and hold everything together. So queen c8, c3, knight d7. So black is just trying to control as many squares possible so as to prevent white from advancing any further. And then for whatever reason, black puts the queen on a8. I don't see any merit to that. but maybe it changes nothing. And here, black split open the E files, so black is winning. White can't do anything. Here, I don't know about taking on H3. It looks fine, I guess. Yeah, this should be fine. And I do wonder if it's possible to sacrifice the rook, play this way, to create some safety for black to liquidate white's attack. But I don't know. Maybe what Yohe did with king d6 makes more sense because the king has great control of the center. It will take on d5 whenever white tries to advance. So that kind of happens, and now all the queen has to do is stay on b8 and c8, the queening squares, because the king controls this pawn and black has two rooks to make waiting moves with, so it's just a winning endgame for black. He decided to take the pawn on b7. It doesn't really matter because the queen can still hold these pawns, so easily winning endgame. Yep. Alright, so to recap, first of all, the opening was okay for both sides. This is right. I would not advance h3. It's not the end of the world, but if you keep the pawns on h1 and h2, then it allows a very nice idea for white. So after g6, h6, and take on f7 and play e6 and king goes back to e8, eventually white will be able to take away black's control of the kingside rook by playing g5 here. Positional sacrifice. And now the point is this rook cannot move back without the white pawns expanding to h4, h5, h3, h4. And eventually sacrificing h6 so that white can play f6. So very strong idea for white. It's probably the one single idea for white that threatens the health of the rook shuffle in entirety. This is probably the one and only line for white where white can argue that he can force a win, I think, against the rook shuffle. But obviously that kind of consensus is very shaky. h2, rook a7, g6, again play h6. So now I prefer white here, I guess, because okay, take with the d pawn, not the f pawn. Prefer white because now he has this strong pawn on g6. Okay, d6 is not terrible, but I would rather start with c6 and c5 so that I can gain control of the center by trading off the b pawn and placing a firmly placed pawn on c6, right? And then now black has to move this rook. He cannot move this rook, otherwise b6 is super strong. And now here, white has a pleasant choice between f6, d6, and b6. But instead, Steven went for early d6 again, not the end of the world, but after d6, take, white has to take caution about the h4 pawn, which means that after e5 and bishop e7, perhaps white even needs to play g5 just to simply prevent bishop takes h4. what's worth noting is that since white took back with the f pawn on e6 instead of with the d pawn, it kind of meant that there was less defense on the king side. So after the d pawn takes and white pushes d6, right? Something like this, and then d6. Well, after these trades, and e5 and bishop e7, you might notice that white still has a pawn on f2 to defend g3, which means that bishop takes h4 is no longer a threat. So white can just play a move, and if take the pawn, then white can either capture back or even ignore it, because this pawn on f2 guards the king side. That's another reason to capture away from the center and not towards the center. Exception with the rook pawns. If you are using a rook pawn to make a recapture, that's generally good. Like if black captures on b4 or something, then white should capture a takes b4, not c takes b4. Because it's okay to have a rook pawn deficit. Alright, next game. So I think I was mistaken. They must have played 5 games then, because I thought they only played 4. Okay. But Yohe begins with a5, and then a6, a4. That looks reasonable, but b6 is normal. My ears are waterlogged. Really itchy. b6, okay. That would be the most normal move, but then black has some creative ideas. He can either play h5 and start shuffling the h-rook, or note that it's important to first capture on g4. I mean, otherwise white can prevent the shuffle by playing g6 and g5, and now all of a sudden this rook cannot move. Black can take on g6 and play e6 and knight e7, and that's a whole nother story, but I think white is objectively better there. a4 is fine, I think, and then b6, okay. Here I would probably trade twice on b6, or yeah, probably, so that I can play e5 and d5 or something like that. I could even take on a6, but he takes on a6, take, why not take on b6 again? Black has no breakthrough on the queen side. I mean, white has 3 rook pawns. He can push a5. He can put pawn on d5 to stop the knight from going to c6. And yeah, if bishop d7, then again, a5. So h5. So in this game, Yohe kind of chose a different opening strategy. 5 and h5. So queen a7 does nothing. I did not really like b5 because the knight can maybe come to b6. However, I think white can create a situation so that black does not have time for that. First of all, white can consider c5. Secondly, white can even consider d5, so that after d6 and e6, the knight cannot go to d7 without losing material. So maybe b5 is okay, it's just not the principal move. It just works for concrete reasons. But here, now black can play knight b6, right? Knight d7. So maybe this would even win for black, I don't know. So knight b6, d5, take, and maybe black is winning because he's got a strong defense on the king side. White is not far advanced in the center. So I think it is possible that black could be winning here very easily. So I would have played knight d7 here. King d7 is total joke. No offense, but it makes like 0 sense because it's worse than leaving your king on e8. It's like way worse. Just leave the king on e8 or d8. And just stalling here is better. Because when the king comes to like queen side, that allows white to kick the king around with tempo, buy himself some time to create a more developed attack. So yeah, this makes no sense to me. But he does go back to d8, I guess, kind of realizing his mistake or something. He just kind of ran out of a plan, even though he should put the knight on b6 and break open the queen side. So here he does break open, but it's too late because black has only 2 defenders and white is very well developed. Yeah, very well developed on the king side. And here white is just winning. He will play g7. So to recap, opening outcome should favor white, I think, but b5 is hard to play because you have to always make sure you prevent the knight from jumping to b6. So maybe it's better to just play in the center like d5 and just kind of ignore the attack on a4 for now. So I did not like b5, but I think it is possible to make it work if you prevent knight e7. So for example, here black is threatening knight d7, therefore white should play e6. So that's just the kind of thing to watch out for. So black could have won with knight d7, but he chose the absolutely wrong plan and got smashed on the king side. Black did. So that concludes this series for, not series, that concludes this segment of the tournament. That concludes this match of the tournament. Yohe versus stephenthomasconrad. I guess that they did play each other 5 times. I might have just miscounted. I'm going to check back. 4, 5. Yeah, they played 5 times. Perfect. Thank you. I hope this was useful.